Welcome back to the deep dive. We've talked about Buddhism on the show before, but I don't know, it always feels like we kind of barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
And there's some really, really huge concepts there that could use a much closer look.
Yeah, for sure.
So today we're going deep, really deep. We're going right to the source. We've got Kraskolarchisi, and we're going to unpack the foundational ideas, the practices, everything.
Awesome.
Our mission, if you will, is to move beyond, just a sort of general understanding, like a surface level understanding, and really grasp like what these core principles, what they really mean.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy to kind of have like a tourist approach, to Buddhist philosophy. You kind of get a sense of it. But to really appreciate the depth, we need to understand the nuts and bolts, the foundational building blocks. And that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to begin with kind of the Buddhist worldview. And at the heart of that is the idea that mind and matter are not two.
Okay.
And then this really crucial principle of dependent origination, which is seeis. It's a really different way of seeing everything.
Mind and matter are not two. Okay, so right away, right? That feels like a pretty huge departure from how most of us, I think, in West experience the world.
Yeah.
Right? Like we see like a very distinct separation, between our inner thoughts and feelings and then, the external physical world.
Right.
So if that's not the case, like if those are not two separate things, what actually makes up reality?
Yeah, so the text lays out 5 fundamental elements that constitute all of existence, known as the 5 skandhas.
Okay.
And that's in Chinese. And those 5 are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness.
Okay, so 5 skandhas.
Yeah.
So like those are the basic
ingredients,
of everything.
Everything we experience.
So let's break them down one by one.
Okay.
Let's start with form, which is eris.
Right. Exactly.
And the text kind of points out right away that this isn't just about like tangible stuff, right? It's not just mountains and rivers.
Right.
But it also includes our own sensory organs.
Exactly. It includes, your eyes, your ears, your nose, tongue, the whole physical package.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And even digging a little deeper, it talks about the 4 great elements within form.
Okay, so 4 great elements, what are we talking about here?
So these are, earth, water, fire, and wind.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note that these aren't like, elements in the periodic table sense.
Right.
But more like core qualities.
Okay.
So, earth would be like the solidity of a rock, or water would be the moisture in a plant. And fire would be the warmth of the sun, or wind would be the motion, like the rustling leaves,
Okay, so they're more properties.
They're properties, yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And they kind of combine in these countless ways to create everything we perceive as form. So your physical body, the solidity of the ground, the flow of a river, all of that's kind of a manifestation of these elements.
Okay, so my body, this microphone, the air, all of it, form.
It's all form, yeah, and it's different, combinations of these properties.
Interesting. Okay, so then what about feeling, which is right.
Right, yeah.
Now, this sounds like this is where we shift to more of the internal landscape, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's like the emotional functioning of all sentient beings.
Okay.
So the text equates it to emotions, as we would understand them in psychology. So it's how we register pleasure, when something agreeable happens. How we experience suffering when we're faced with something that, we don't like.
Right, so like joy, frustration, contentment, anger.
Exactly, yeah. All expressions of the feeling skandha.
Okay, so that's feeling. Now, how is perception different?
Okay, so perception is,
okay,
and this is how we grasp and recognize objects.
Okay.
So it's like the mental faculty that takes in the raw sensory data, and forms mental images and concepts.
Okay.
So the text links it to psychological imagery.
Okay.
So if you see a cat, the feeling skandha might register it as pleasant.
Yeah.
But the perception skandha is what allows you to identify it as a cat, to create that image of catness in your mind.
Okay, got it. So feeling is more like the emotional response, and perception is more like
the recognition, the labeling.
Labeling, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's next?
So next is mental formations.
Mental formations. Okay, now this one still sounds kind of abstract to me. What is that? Yeah.
Yeah. So this refers to volitional activities that arise from our mental processing.
Okay.
So it's the realm of, our thoughts, our intentions, our judgments, and that lead to our actions and speech.
Okay.
So our source connects this to psychological will.
Okay.
So the decision to, reach out and pet the cat, the urge to pick it up, that would be mental formations driven by, your thoughts and intentions related to your perception and feeling of the cat.
Okay. So it's the mental doing that leads to
outward expression.
Outward expression. Okay.
Yeah.
And then finally, we get to consciousness.
Consciousness, which is right. And this is, defined as the faculty of discernment.
Okay.
So our source gives the examples of, the eyes distinguishing colors, ears distinguishing sounds.
Okay.
So it's just the fundamental awareness that registers different sensory inputs and mental states.
Okay.
Much like basic psychological recognition.
Okay, so consciousness is like the initial awareness.
Yeah.
That lets me even register that there is a cat there. Before I have any feeling, perception, or whatever about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Go. So to recap, these 5 skandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These are the fundamental building blocks of everything, internal, external.
Exactly.
That's
exactly right. And as the text really emphasizes, these 5 skandhas, they constitute the entire universe.
Okay.
Not just us, not just sentient beings, but
everything.
The whole shebang.
Okay, so it's a pretty integrated view of reality.
Yeah, it's pretty radical.
It is. Okay, now you mentioned before that, this Buddhist worldview also includes dependent origination, which is a grow.
Right.
So how does that fit in with this whole idea of the 5 skandhas?
So dependent origination is kind of the key to explaining how all these phenomena arise and cease, including the skandhas.
Okay.
So the text is very clear that the arising and ceasing of everything is due to causes and conditions.
Causes and conditions. Okay.
And that's C, by the way.
Okay.
And so the cause is like the primary factor in something coming to be.
Okay.
And then the condition is like a supporting or contributing circumstance.
Okay. So it's not like a simple A causes B,
No, it's not linear like that at all. It's very
complicated.
It's much more, complex and interrelated.
Okay.
And actually, the source quotes from the Agamas.
Okay.
And there's this great line that says, this exists, therefore that exists. This arises, therefore that arises. This does not exist, therefore that does not exist. This ceases, therefore that ceases.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So it's really showing how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
Nothing has this absolute independent existence.
Right.
Everything is coming into being and passing away based on all these other things.
In reliance on a bunch of other factors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a huge web where everything is connected.
Totally.
And there's this great analogy that the source uses of 2 bundles of reeds leaning against each other.
Okay, yeah.
So this is illustrating the interdependence between consciousness, so our subjective experience, and what's called name and form, which is basically the objective world, the other 4 skandhas.
Okay.
So just as those 2 bundles of reeds can only stand upright by leaning on each other, consciousness and name and form are mutually constitutive.
Okay.
They can't exist independently.
Okay.
So there's no consciousness without something to be conscious of.
Right.
And that's name and form.
Yeah.
And conversely, there's no name and form without consciousness to perceive it and experience it.
Right.
So they arise together, they cease together.
That's fascinating. So my awareness of the world and the world itself, those things are inextricably linked.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical idea.
It is, because when I just go about my day, I tend to see myself and I see objects and we're all kind of separate. We're doing our own thing.
Yeah.
How does this idea that everything is so interconnected and interdependent, how does that challenge that?
I think it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Our minds are kind of hardwired to see things as separate, as independent.
Yeah.
But, dependent origination shows us that everything is temporary. What we think of as solid, separate entities are actually just these temporary configurations within this vast web of interconnected causes and conditions.
Wow. Okay, so now, if everything arises from this web of causes and conditions, does Buddhism say anything about, like, an ultimate creator?
No, the text is very clear on this point.
Okay.
Buddhism does not have a divine being who created or controls the universe.
Okay, so no God, no prime mover.
No.
Okay.
Everything arises from the interplay of these various conditions.
Got it.
And the principle that governs this
Okay.
is the universal law of cause and effect, which is Sinai.
Okay.
And the text really emphasizes this. It says, as a cause is, so its effect will be. Given cause and condition, the effect is bound to happen.
Okay, so there's no getting out of it.
No, it's an ironclad law.
Wow. Oh.
And this law applies not just to physical events in the external world, but also to changes in our mind, the transformation of objects, the interaction between mind and matter.
So it's all-encompassing?
It's universal.
Wow. Now, this law of cause and effect also has implications beyond a single lifetime, right?
Right.
I mean, the text talks about this 3-lifetime perspective and the concept of karma.
Yeah, this is really where that comes in.
Okay.
So the law of cause and effect is the basis for the Buddhist understanding of karma and reincarnation. So our actions, whether it's physical deeds, words, or even thoughts and intentions, all of these create what are called karmic seeds.
Okay.
And these seeds will eventually ripen into their corresponding effects.
And not necessarily in this lifetime.
Not necessarily, no. They can manifest in future lives.
Right.
It's this ongoing cycle.
Yeah, that reminds me of that saying that's quoted in the text. Good deeds bring good results. Evil deeds bring evil results. If the time hasn't come, it doesn't mean there's no retribution.
Right, exactly. It really captures that long-term view.
It does. Okay, so let's talk more about this idea of, the nature of life and this cycle of reincarnation, within this framework of cause and effect.
Okay.
So the text starts this section with this amazing statement attributed to the Buddha upon his enlightenment. And he says, all sentient beings are endowed with the wisdom and virtuous appearance of the Tathagata, but due to delusional attachments, they are unable to realize it.
That's a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
So what is he saying there?
Yeah. So he's introducing this core concept of Buddha nature, which is huth.
Okay.
And the text describes this as our inherent, originally pure nature.
Okay.
So it's the potential for enlightenment that exists in every single being.
Okay.
And it says that this Buddha nature possesses infinite virtues and abilities.
So at our core, we are already enlightened.
Yes, basically.
But we don't know it.
We don't realize it.
Okay, so if we all have this potential, why are we stuck in this cycle of suffering and reincarnation?
So the answer, according to the text, is delusional attachments.
Okay.
Which are also called ignorance.
Ignorance.
And that's...
Okay.
And so these are illusions, clinging to impermanent things.
Okay.
And they act as veils that obscure our true nature.
Okay.
So it's like a cloudy sky that's hiding the sun.
Okay, so it's our own mistaken perceptions that keep us from seeing our true nature.
Exactly. And so this leads to the arising of what's called the deluded mind, which is C.
Okay.
And the deluded mind is constantly active, generating karma, through our thoughts, words, and deeds.
Okay.
Both positive and negative.
Okay.
And the seeds of this karma are stored in a very important concept called the Alaya-consciousness, which is Alaya-consciousness. Okay, so this sounds pretty central to understanding
it is
this whole cycle.
It's the root of the cycle of birth and death, according to the text.
Okay, so what is it?
So it's a very fundamental consciousness.
Okay.
And it acts as a storehouse for all our karmic imprints.
Okay, so like a karmic memory bank.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
it's recording everything.
Yeah, and it carries that momentum of our past actions into future lifetime.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
It's like a vast storage drive that's recording every experience, every intention.
Yeah.
And so at the time of death, our normal consciousnesses,
they cease. But the Alaya consciousness, carrying all that karma,
right.
This transmigrates through the 6 realms of existence, and it keeps the cycle going.
So it's that karmic inertia that's held within the Alaya consciousness. That's the engine.
Yeah, exactly. It propels us into new lives.
Okay. So this sounds like a cycle we definitely want to find a way to break free from.
Right.
So how does Buddhism talk about stopping this cycle?
So the key, according to the text, is eradicating delusion and purifying karma, which is attain.
Okay.
So it's a process of recognizing impermanence, no self,
okay,
breaking free from those delusional attachments, ceasing to create negative karma, and actively cultivating good deeds.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It's a lifelong process, but it's It's the path to liberation.
Okay, so what are some of the specific methods or practices that are helpful for this process?
So the text emphasizes the 3 trainings, which is
The 3 trainings,
this
okay?
one. So that's morality, ethics, concentration, meditation, and wisdom.
Okay.
And these are like the core pillars
Yeah.
of Buddhist practice. They work together
Okay.
to cultivate insight and transform our minds.
Okay.
And it also mentions the 6 perfections as practical methods for purifying our mind and body.
Now, remind me what those are again.
So those are generosity, ethical discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom.
Right, right. Okay, and those sound like they're both about inner cultivation and like how we act in the world.
Exactly. And the ultimate aim of all of this, according to the text, is to transform delusion into enlightenment.
Okay.
To achieve liberation from suffering and reach the state of nirvana, which is Nirvana.
Nirvana. Okay. Now, we're talking about Mahayana Buddhism here, right?
Right.
And there's a real emphasis on not just personal liberation, but also helping others achieve enlightenment.
Right.
So how does this idea of bodhisattva practice fit into this?
Yeah. So the text explains that Mahayana really emphasizes this idea of self-awakening and awakening others, benefiting oneself and benefiting others.
Okay.
And that's Eseshalakusita.
What's that?
3 in Chile. Okay.
So it's not just about getting ourselves out of the mess,
Yes.
but helping everyone else as well.
Yeah, it's very much about compassion.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the core of bodhisattva practice is the arising of the bodhisattva,
Okay.
which is rijam,
Okay.
and the taking of the 4 great vows,
Okay.
which are chain.
Okay.
So bodhisattva, the aspiration for Buddhahood,
Yeah.
the text describes it as both selflessness and compassion.
Okay.
So it's this deep wish to attain complete enlightenment, not just for yourself, but for all beings.
Yeah.
And that's really the motivation behind the 4 great vows, which are to liberate countless beings, to eradicate endless afflictions, to learn immeasurable Dharma teachings, and to attain supreme Buddhahood. Wow, those are some big vows.
They are. They're huge.
Yeah.
But that's, that's the spirit of the bodhisattva path.
Yeah. And I imagine that the 6 perfections that we talked about earlier play a role here as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So in the context of bodhisattva practice, the 6 perfections, they're like the means by which a bodhisattva actually works to fulfill those vows.
Okay.
So generosity is cultivated to overcome stinginess. Ethical discipline is practiced to overcome transgression. Patience is developed to overcome anger. Diligence is embraced to overcome laziness. Meditative concentration is cultivated to overcome distraction. And wisdom is pursued to overcome ignorance.
Right.
So it's really putting these principles into action.
Yeah, it's not just about sitting on a cushion and meditating.
No, it's about engaging with the world.
It's about living it.
Exactly.
Okay. The text also mentions the 4 embracing dharmas.
Right.
What are those all about?
So these are more specific methods that bodhisattvas use to connect with and guide others.
Okay.
So those are giving, which involves sharing material goods, the Dharma, freedom from fear.
Okay.
Loving speech, which means communicating with kindness and sincerity.
Yeah.
Beneficial action, which is acting in ways that benefit others. And cooperation, which is working together with others and understanding their perspectives.
Well,
so these practices really help to build rapport, create conditions for others to learn and practice.
Okay. So it's really a path that's both deeply personal, right? And then also very much engaged in the world.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Buddhism spread from India to China, and as it did, it kind of evolved, it diversified.
Right, right.
And the text mentions the emergence of 8 major schools of Chinese Buddhism.
Yeah, these are known as the 8 major schools.
Okay, so can you give us just like a brief overview of what those schools are and what makes them distinct?
Sure. So as Buddhism kind of journeyed from India to China, it interacted with the existing culture, and it, naturally, new forms arose.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, different interpretations.
Yeah.
And so we have these 8 major schools
Great.
that have really shaped Chinese Buddhist practice.
Okay, so what are they?
Okay, so first we have the Madhyamaka school.
Okay.
And that's Kosha, or a Kofa.
Okay.
And it's rooted in the treatises of Nagarjuna.
Okay.
So it really focuses on emptiness and the articulation of the two truths.
Okay.
So that's the conventional truth of our everyday experience.
Right.
And then the ultimate truth of emptiness.
Okay.
And then the middle way, which is avoiding extreme views.
Got it.
So that's Madhyamaka.
Okay.
Then we have the Yogacara school.
Okay.
Which is Omari or Ness.
Sure.
And this school really emphasizes the role of consciousness. So it delves into concepts like the 5 dharmas, the 3 natures of reality, the 8 consciousnesses, the 2 aspects of no self, and the transformation of consciousness into wisdom.
Okay, so Madhyamaka is really focused on emptiness, the nature of reality. Yogacara is much more about how the mind works.
Yeah.
Consciousness.
Consciousness, exactly.
Okay.
And then we have the Chiantai school.
Kantai, okay.
Which is Tisao.
Okay.
And it's based on the Lotus Sutra.
Okay.
And they developed a system for classifying Buddhist teachings into 5 periods and 8 types of teachings.
Okay.
And they emphasize the threefold truth, which is emptiness, provisional existence, and the middle way.
Okay.
And this principle of the non-obstruction of phenomena.
Okay.
Which means like how interconnected everything is.
Got it. Okay.
Then we have the Huayan school.
Huayan.
Which is Hojing.
Okay. Okay.
And it takes the Avatamsaka Sutra as its central text.
Okay.
And they have this very grand and intricate vision of the interconnectedness of all phenomena.
Okay.
So they use this 5-fold classification of teachings and these doctrines like the 6 characteristics, the 10 mysteries, and the threefold contemplation.
Okay.
To explain how everything kind of interpenetrates
okay.
and mutually contains each other.
Okay, so it sounds like Tiantai and Huayan are both really kind of offering these very holistic views of reality, but maybe with slightly different frameworks.
Yeah, different approaches.
Okay.
And then we have Chan.
Chan,
which is S.
Okay.
And this is, Zen Buddhism.
Yeah.
So it emphasizes direct experience, insight through meditation, and direct transmission. So it often de-emphasizes, the study of scriptures.
Right, right. It's about practice.
It's about, direct experience.
Okay, so that's Chan. What else?
Then we have Pure Land Buddhism.
Pure Land.
Which is Prana.
Okay.
And they focus on devotion to Amitabha Buddha.
Okay.
And the aspiration to be reborn in his pure land. Okay. Through recitation of his name.
Got it.
So it's a path that's very accessible, especially for, lay practitioners.
Right.
And then we have the Vinaya school, which is Drang.
Okay.
And they're primarily concerned with the study and practice of monastic precepts.
Okay.
So these are the ethical guidelines for monks and nuns.
Okay.
And then also for lay followers.
Got it.
And finally, we have esoteric Buddhism.
Esoteric Buddhism.
Which is Ai or Yi.
Okay.
And this is also known as Tantric Buddhism or Vajrayana.
Okay.
So it's based on Tantric scriptures, like the Mahavairokkana Sutra and the Vajrasekhar Sutra.
Okay.
And they employ these 3 mysteries of body, speech, and mind through various yogic practices, like mandalas, mantras, and mudras.
Yeah.
And the goal is to attain Buddhahood in this lifetime.